Welcome, everyone, to your first session of your Captain's Council. I am the Captain's Coach, and I'm excited to help you along your journey throughout your season as you try to lead your team effectively and become the best team that you can be. Today, I want to help you to understand why your role matters so much and to start with a story to set us up. And this story is about Mel Fisher, who was born in the 1930s. When he was 7 years old, he read Robert Stevenson's Treasure Island. And right after that, he became obsessed with this idea and adventure of treasure hunting. And he spent years researching tales of ships being swept away at sea that supposedly carried exorbitant amounts of treasure. And at one point in time, throughout this period of research, he stumbled across this story about the Spanish galleon named Atocha. And this galleon was said to have the largest treasure ever recorded on a ship. He believed that he was going to find this lost ship one day, and many people didn't think that it really existed. So he ends up going to Purdue to become an engineer. He joined the Army and became a combat engineer in there and fought in World War II. And he came back and started his own company, creating diving equipment and technologies and products. And that was at this time that he began his own adventures and used his brand new invention to help him locate sunken ships at the bottom of the ocean. And he had some success, but no success at all at finding this one treasure in the Spanish galleon of the Atocha. And most people believed that it was a fictional tale and just a story. Very few believed in its existence. But every single day he would wake up and he said, "Today is the day I'm going to find it." So after about 5 years, still no ship. 10 years, 15, 20, 25. And then it wasn't until 27 years later that he finally got the call that his company had finally found the ship. They finally found the Atocha. And my question for you all with this story is, what do you think it takes for somebody to endure 27 years of failure? And the answer to that, one of the answers to that, is your beliefs. And beliefs are what drive us. And so what I want you to take away from this story is the beliefs that you have matter. And there are 3 beliefs in particular that he had to have to endure and to continue to strive and continue to enact the right process and behaviors to ultimately reach this end goal. And the first belief was that he had to believe that there was a treasure out there. The second was that he believed that he was going to be the one to find it. And the third, that regardless of how long it took, that journey was worth it. And so we're going to use this story as we move forward in the next 2 series and 2 videos. We'll come back to that. The first belief that I want you to really understand that we talked about is this idea that there's a treasure out there. And that treasure, in correlation to you, is that you matter. And you matter for the team for multiple reasons that we're going to get into here. But before we get into that, I'd like to have you pause at this point and talk with your teammates about the experiences that you've had previously in regards to team captain. Regardless at what level you are at, hopefully you've had some experiences in dealing with them. Some have had really good experiences and positive. They've been a positive influence. Some have been bad. So at this point in time, I'd like you to pause and talk through each one of these points and ultimately come to some sort of a conclusion as to what were the leadership lessons that you learned from those experiences. And next, what I'd like to do in relationship to trying to get you to understand why it is that you matter and why this role matters. I want to start with this book that's called The Captain's Class, and I recommend that you all take the time to read this. It's a great subjective approach with some good research about what the greatest teams that ever existed all had in common. And so what Sam Walker did here was he spent 10 to 12 years trying to figure out who the best teams were in all of the sports and all of the different countries. And he ended up finding some criteria, and he put these 2 different tiers together, so to speak. And what he found was that throughout this period of time, of high performance, the one common element between all of these high-performing teams was one thing, and it wasn't necessarily the coach. It wasn't necessarily the strategies or tactics or resources that they used. What he came to the conclusion of is that this high performance started when one individual came into the program. This high performance started, and that person ended up being named, or was initially named, the team captain. And as soon as that individual left, this high performance started to wane off. And so within this book, he goes through to say that there are 7 certain characteristics that these team captains had. And I won't go through every single one of these, but these are a couple of the takeaways I think that will be useful for you as you move forward into this role. The first is that talent and big budget only take a team so far. And you seem, with some research that I've just mentioned, seem to be a vital component of what it takes to win championships and for you to reach, and for your team to reach, the potential that it has. And the second one is that great captains bend the rules a little bit, but really mostly are not worried about being unpopular. And one of the biggest things that you can do is to hold your teammates accountable. And that is one of the biggest problems that I see with the athletes and captains that I work with, is most are afraid and they just want to be liked. And one of your most important roles, again, is to hold other people accountable to the standards of behavior that your coaches and your culture have within the program. The third is that rarely are great team captains the superstars. They are indispensable support players that are willing to put in the grunt work, so to speak, which gives them the right to really push others, which we all need. We need other people to come around us and support us and encourage us to help us reach the next level of who we can be and the skill sets that we can have. And finally, each one of these team captains that he puts and names in this book were not interested in being in front of the camera and the fame or the glory that came with the position, but only the success of the team. They were single-minded, all of them, in that sense. And so here are some quotes on player leadership from some of the great coaches in the game. And I'll quickly summarize this by saying that what all of them are saying is basically that internal leadership pushes a team to win championships. Talent takes you so far. Discipline and mental toughness will get you a couple more wins throughout the season, but you will not win championships. You won't win championships consistently without internal leadership happening within the group. And so there are 3 reasons, again, all circling around this concept and this belief that team captains matter, that your role matters. And so I want to go through each one of these and explain to you some mental models that you can use to think about that support this idea and aspect of the team captaincy role and just leadership and influence in general. The first is Pareto's principle. And this states that 80%, or it's the 80-20 rule, and it states that 80% of the outputs stem from 20% of the inputs. And it initially came from this economist, Vilfredo Pareto, in the 1700s, I believe. And what he was trying to find out was where were all of this agricultural produce coming from in Italy. And he found that 80% of the produce was coming from 20% of the farms. And he went on to do some more research in on a different topic, and was looking at wealth distribution in Italy, and found that 80% of the wealth was held by 20% of the people. And we, as a organizational psychology a group over the years, have utilized this as a productivity and efficiency model. And it's very useful to help you to focus in on the things that matter. But what I think matters for you all as the team captains is that you all represent 80% of the influence. And so what that means is that 20% of the players on your team are equating to 80% of the influence. And I think that matters. And because influence is all about behavior, and you are exerting your influence on what is acceptable and appropriate behaviors in the team and amongst the team. and I want to say, make sure it's clear here and now that you all understand that you all should not, and do not hijack the leadership role in its entirety. As I just mentioned, that's only 80, you're only exerting 80% of the influence. That's a lot. And that's why we want to focus on developing you to help provide a culture of leadership. But I think it starts with you all. But ultimately, your goal and role is to try and win over everybody else and get their buy-in. And to do that requires you to allow them to also exert their influence and their leadership as well. The next principle is the 10-80-10 principle of human behavior. Essentially what this states is that there is a top 10% with every team in any organization, which are the elite performers or the nucleus of the group. Under that is the 80% of the individuals on the team that just meet the status quo and the standard, and they go with the flow, so to speak. And the bottom 10% that are on teams, which are the slackers and the ones that are not really bought into the team and are just barely hanging on by a thread. And what's happening and what's important for you to understand and know is that you are in a war between over the 80% against that bottom 10% of the team. And your goal is to win over that 80% first. And try to get them to be bought in and to meet the expectations, behaviors, and buy-in that you have as well. And the last one that I think is important for you all is this idea of the bystander effect. And it's a social psychological theory that says that people are less likely to step in to mediate a situation if other people are around. And why this matters is because the culture that is within your team consists of behaviors that you allow. Your culture is what you allow. And if you walk past certain behaviors or standards that don't meet your culture, then that is what your culture is. And ultimately, I think that having this role and this title bestowed upon you ultimately provides you the final responsibility to say something. And hopefully, the more that you do that, the more appropriate and normal holding other people accountable becomes, to the point where it's not even necessary anymore because everybody is exerting similar behaviors of high performance. And so the next question that I get asked a lot is, well, what do I do? What are some more roles and responsibilities specifically that I should have as a team captain? And that's very much dependent on your coach, your situation, the sport you play. And we do have an application, a mobile app that we can send you if you're interested, that gives you more specific actions. But in general, these are things that I like to communicate to team captains that are just filling this role now. And the first is that you need to always remember that you're trying to win over your teammates and get them to move up from that 10-80-10 model to your level, so to speak. And you should be setting that standard every single day. The second is that you need to understand what your team's culture is, why your team culture matters, and understand that you are one of the main reinforcers of that culture. The third is that you have to know who you are, especially what your strengths and weaknesses are, because, and as I'll say again, your team is a reflection of you, as you are one of the main influencers. So a lot of times your strengths are seen within the team, but your weaknesses are also shown. And you want to make sure that you find ways to balance yourself throughout this time period and find other people who support those weaknesses. The next one is modeling the way. You certainly can't talk the talk and not walk the walk. Leadership is, within this next point, is all about service. It's all about serving them, and you have to understand that it's what's best for the team, then it's what's best for the teammates, and you're always at the bottom, and you're always trying to have the courage and the determination to do what's necessary to serve in the best interest of the team and your teammates. And then finally, these last two things I think are very interesting, and that's that although you need to hold people accountable, most of the time what you should be doing is just encouraging others to be their best and get to know them, maintain a relationship, obviously, but you want to be encouraging. And a question I get asked a lot is, when or should I yell during practice? in a sense, that's you holding people accountable. But I want to make sure you understand that most of the time, all of the time, I've never come across a situation where this has been the case, but the players on your team that work so hard to be better are not messing up during games or practices on purpose. And so you want to encourage them through that. But the times that I do think it's necessary for you to yell, maybe get serious with them, is if there's three things. I call it IFF or if. The first is if they lack intensity. If you feel like they're lacking intensity, then that should be an instance in which you get vocal about it. If you feel that they lack focus, that is another time that you should do so. And then if you see some obvious form based on the sport that you play, to do a quick coach up, I think that is certainly fine as well. Usually you want to not have a 10-minute discussion about it. You just want to remind them of important mental cues that they can use to help get their form back to the way it should be. And there are two other models I want to discuss as well. And the first is this idea that winning is a choice. And so one of the things that I coach on are the 3 Ps of winning, which is that process drives the position that you're put in, which puts you in a certain probability of winning. Skill certainly plays a role in our outcome, but so does luck. And there's this balance between the two. And the goal ultimately is for us to decrease the role that luck plays in our outcome. And the best way to do that, and really one of the only ways to do that, is to have a better process than everybody else. And our process are the behaviors that we enact on a day-to-day basis. It's the things that we do that ultimately lead us to a certain result. And so what you want to think about is how can you separate yourself day over day, week over week, month over month against your opponents, so that you have a higher probability of winning. And so it's important that you realize that leadership is an action, and it requires you to take daily steps as well to separate yourself and to increase the standards of high performance within your team. And that is a choice that you make on a daily basis. And then the second one I've mentioned previously is that the team is a reflection of you. It's this law of reflection. And I see it quite often for both coaches and captains. Very, very often, again, strengths and weaknesses are played out and visible amongst the team. So understand who you are, and realize that your team will reflect you. And that is the stopping point for this video. From my end, those were a couple quick models. I think the biggest thing is to just remember and believe and understand. I hope that I did a good job explaining that you matter as a team captain, and your role matters for all of the reasons and many more that I wasn't able to even get to. So at this point in time, if you could, with your team, go around the room with the other leaders that are on your team and talk about how do you define leadership as an individual and as a team, and from the coaching staff too. You want to make sure that there is alignment on this, because different definitions lead to different expectations of behaviors. So I think this is a great time, if you want to pause the video, work on this with your team and talk about, even outside of just what leadership is, think about you as an individual leader. What are your strengths and what are your weaknesses? And thank you for your time, and I'll see you in the next video.